All right, welcome to another episode of the Coffee Break Podcast, where our mission is to share business ideas, practices, and strategies. And today, we're going to go a little different than we have in the past, but a very beneficial topic in business and team building specifically. Our guest today is Andrea Isaacs. Came all the way down here from Louisville, Kentucky, just for the podcast.
That's exactly right.
That is very impressive. We appreciate that. We're going to be chatting with her, get to know you. We've got rapid fire coming up right after this.
We got so much to say. We got a podcast to make. We're sipping on lattes, and it's time for a coffee break. It's time for a coffee break. Oh, yeah.
All right, welcome back. Andrea, here we go. We do a segment every episode, 5 rapid-fire questions just to get to know you a little better, randomly selected with unknown point values.
Okay.
Just to get under your skin.
I'm ready.
You good?
Let's do it.
All right, here we go. Number 1, what is the best part about your day?
Oh, man. Okay. This is so cheesy, but
Yeah.
so I hope that this is okay. But I have been married for 15 years.
Okay.
And I love still every single day, like it registers in my mind. I love getting in bed at night with my husband, like ending the day, because we lead crazy lives. And it is like a reminder, like, okay, I'm living the dream.
There you
like,
go.
Here it is.
Just getting in the bed at night, just
best
knowing
part.
that it's all over.
I made it. I survived another day.
There you go. Number 2, what is the most random thing in your purse or wallet?
Probably a Hot Wheels car. I'm a mom of 4.
Yeah.
And so there at any given time, I mean, there's going to be a half-eaten sucker, a Hot Wheels car, probably a Paw Patrol Band-Aid, something like that.
Paw Patrol Band-Aid. That's
That's pretty random, right?
I can relate to that. Number 3, if you could pick one job to do forever, what would it be?
Oh, man. Okay. So my dream job, this is so embarrassing. I want to be a Disney animated voice. That's my dream job.
That's pretty interesting.
I would love that. I want to be a Disney princess voice.
That's a good goal. I like that. I would
That's
imagine
a job I could do forever.
I'm trying to think who I would have ever asked that question to that I would have gotten that response.
Yeah, it's been
I want to be the voice of a Disney princess.
Yeah. Could you go to work every day and just be a princess?
I mean, anything to do with Disney, I guess that would be a fun and enjoyable.
It's the way to go. That's right.
All right, number 4. What can you do today that you were not capable of 1 year ago?
Saying no.
Oh.
Yeah.
That sounds deep.
It is. This has for sure, 2019, will be marked by my ability to say no to something. And that has never been in my DNA. And but for sure, I see it as a noticeable change and a sign, probably maybe even of a little bit of maturity.
Yeah.
But it's huge. That's been huge. So yeah, something I probably couldn't have even done a year ago.
Yeah, it's fun. You read a lot of books about leadership and impactful people over our lifetime, and most of the time they're marked more by what they say no to than they say yes to.
It's huge.
Anyway, that's we could go on for that on that forever. Number 5, what is one thing that you would most like to change about the world?
Oh, that is Miss America quality question right there. What do I want for the world? No negativity. I mean, honestly, it is something that I shriek away from. So I feel like people naturally are cynical and critical and negative, and so if I could change one thing, rid the world of negativity. Yeah, get rid of it.
It would just be a Disney all the time.
Basically, that's what we're going for, right?
All right, congratulations, you passed. That's rapid fire. Your score is 932.
Okay, 932. I'll take it. I'll take it.
Don't really know what that means, but that's where we're at. All right, cool. So today's topic is Enneagram, and this has been an interesting thing.
Okay.
We have really around our organization adapted to personality assessments a long time ago, and I know Enneagram is a little different, but we adapted to Myers-Briggs.
Yep.
And so we want to talk about that here in a little bit, how they differ or how they kind of apply to each other.
Sure.
But the reason that we did it, and the reason I found out about it, was based out of and I've told this story lots, but pure frustration with dealing with another individual, and we were just butting heads all the time. We couldn't figure out why.
Sure.
did the Myers-Briggs test and okay.
Like enlightening.
It was so enlightening, and just reading through it, it was just this kind of eye-opening experience to go, okay, all of these things make sense.
Okay,
you know,
yeah.
I'm really, really clued in now.
Well, and it makes you feel a little less broken, like a little less like, oh, okay, someone's explaining myself back to me.
Exactly.
And for whatever reason, I find that really helpful.
It is. It's very eye-opening because you go, okay, well, all of these things that you marked off as a negative
Sure.
or a detriment or whatever you wanted to put it, you now go, okay, there's lots of other people like this.
And that makes sense.
And this is it's just how you see the world.
That's
right?
great.
So fast forward through, just to kind of set up the conversation, tell us a little bit, what is the Enneagram? What does it mean? I know it's an old philosophy, but what is it? So if anybody has never heard the word before, the 12 people that are listening to this that's never heard it before.
Never heard of Enneagram. Yeah.
What is it?
So in the simplest way, Enneagram literally means like a design of 9. So Ennea is like a drawing or a design, and then gram is 9. And so in the Enneagram wisdom, or this kind of older philosophy, there are 9 types of people in the world.
Okay.
And I like to say that means that there are 9 normals.
Sure.
Because so often we feel like if we don't see lots of other versions of ourselves and our typical behaviors in other people, we feel othered. You know, like isolated or misunderstood. And so when we start with kind of this idea that the Enneagram really explains 9 normal ways of seeing and thinking and kind of operating in the world, that is really comforting, or at least I have found that to be the case for a lot of people.
Yeah, the most powerful thing that I've heard about the Enneagram is not any of them are better than others.
That's exactly right.
And that's the normal thing for people is like, well, I'm this is better than
Which
your
one
number,
am I?
right?
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's like it is just the way that you see the world.
That's right.
And it's none of them are bad. It's just
And I would even go as far to say that like all of them are necessary. So all 9 types really kind of, you know, the legend of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. One of the reasons that he made a round table is because he wanted there to be an equality to the knights and not to feel like anybody was at the head of the table. And in the Enneagram, if you look at the actual design, it is circular. And so that same principle kind of applies, that, you know, a type 1 is not greater or less than a type 8 or a type 5 or a type 9, but they all have kind of their seat at the table in essence, and have their perspective, their vantage point, and that all 9 of them are bringing really beautiful things to the world.
All right, so we kind of talked about it at this onset, but give us a breakdown, a little bit of the differences between the Enneagram, maybe Myers-Briggs, DISC, Strength Finders. There's a ton of them out there.
There's
but
a ton.
How do they all stack up?
So it goes all the way back to like the Greeks, and maybe you've heard the terms like melancholy or phlegmatic or sanguine. I mean, so it's not a new idea to try and
Categorize
understand.
people.
Yeah, and it's not to box people in. It's that we need some kind of schema where we can understand how we're different, how we're similar, and so we've seen lots of these throughout history. It's not a new idea, but yeah, Myers-Briggs, Strength Finder, DISC, things like that. Anything of that nature that's giving us information and kind of maybe even speaking to human behavior or human personality is always exciting. It's always intriguing. Where I feel like the Enneagram and why maybe I was drawn to that even more than some of the others that you mentioned is I feel like it picks up where others kind of end, kind of leave off. So what I mean by that is when I read my Myers-Briggs or I find out, my strengths and things like that, I'm like, oh, great. That some of that resonates. That's good information.
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do with that? and on really bad days where you're kind of maybe even a little bit self-loathing, it feels like a label or like not a death sentence. That's really super extreme, but like this thing that I can't break out of.
Yeah.
And the Enneagram is much more, well, number one, speaking to motive and why I behave, not just telling me this prescribed, kind of these actions, but so it's telling me motive, it's explaining to me why, which I found super helpful. Yeah. And then the second part is it really provides kind of this path for growth. Like this, I can move forward and be a healthier version of myself, not feeling like I'm just a subject to whatever branding, was put on me. So that's kind of maybe the way I'd explain it.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Coffee Break Podcast. If this information has been helpful to you, or you just really kind of like our theme song, can you help us out by rating us on whatever app you're using? And if you get really fancy, how about sharing a screenshot on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn? Okay, enough of all this. Let's get back to the conversation. I heard a wise man once say it's kind of like a default mode. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I love that. I love that term. In fact, I would even say, here's the easiest way in my brain, the way that the Enneagram makes sense to me. So I have my personal laptop, that goes everywhere with me, and the default printer is my home printer, like at my house. So if I'm going to go to print, it's going to print at my house. But if I step into my office or some other setting and I go to print, I forget, it's my default printer. I've got to go in and override that and change or hook up to whatever printer I'm around. I don't want to change my home setting. Like, I don't want to change that my house is my default setting, but I know and I recognize the circumstances when I have the ability to override and make a different choice.
Gotcha.
And so the Enneagram can work a lot like that, where what feels like me on autopilot, maybe that's another term as well. When I just walk into a room, what feels the most natural, what feels the most autopilot-esque, I don't have to give into that. It is what is comfortable. It's what is natural. But I, as a growing, maturing human being who wants to function in a world with other people that don't operate the same way that I do, I have a choice. Like, I can look at a situation and say, you know what, I need to pull back here, or I need to lean in more, or whatever the case may be.
So basically adapting to to the scenarios that you're in. It's one of the things that I found very interesting once we went through the Myers-Briggs testing for personality, and even with Enneagram, it's now that you have this information, it's almost like you can't use it as a crutch.
No.
If you do, that's like the worst part that you can do with it. But now you're self-aware.
Yes.
So now you're held to a higher standard of accountability that says, okay, now you're aware of this,
things.
so don't,
Yeah. I think I have really, truly experienced it, and the people that I work with and do coaching with, that it is simultaneously like a gut punch, like, okay, wow, and can really explain some things that maybe you have been trying to figure out about yourself, or if you have a partner or a spouse or colleagues that you work closely with. Enneagram kind of puts language around things that maybe have been either obvious to other people, or you felt it intuitively, but you just couldn't articulate it.
Got it.
So it really does a lot of work in a pretty quickly, like what might take you 30 years to uncover about yourself. It can kind of unpack that much faster.
All right, so Enneagram, we're really kind of talking in on that. Why did it see, again, as you talked about, it's been around for a long time. All of a sudden, I mean, if you're on Instagram, you've heard about it.
Yes.
There's a lot of podcast topics about it. It all of a sudden became very popular. It feels like maybe not, but become very popular. What do you attribute to that? Why does that? Why did it just all of a sudden kind of resurface?
I think two things. I think you nailed it with the social media piece. Anytime Instagram gets a hold of something, or like, it just seems like it's more on our radar pretty quickly. But I would say even beyond that, Ian Cron, who is now kind of being seen as like the Godfather, and a wonderful lady named Suzanne Stabile, they co-wrote a book called The Road Back to You. And I think that it just made the Enneagram so much more accessible for people.
Got it.
So if you look at any of the texts prior to their book, and then Suzanne Stabile has another one that she wrote by herself that's just called The Path Between Us. And if you look at the literature before those books came out, it is very heady. Like, it is just it feels like a college philosophy textbook.
Gotcha.
Anything. Another one that came out around the same time is Chris Hewert's The Sacred Enneagram. So I think a lot of those kind of branch into a faith market as well. And that kind of opened the doors for maybe a lot of the other platforms that you've seen.
I think thinking back on it, the first time that I was really aware of it was I'd seen somebody on Instagram post something about, I'm this number with a wing of this number. And I'm like, what? People are making up some random stuff.
Sure.
And then I was listening to a podcast. I think it was the Andy Stanley podcast.
Leadership podcast.
With Ian Crone on it. And they started kind of talking through that. And just through some of that conversation, when they were documenting some of the attributes to each Enneagram number, I was like, hold on a second.
This is bigger than I realized.
Yeah, I was like, I can really see that, how that's impactful. So that's when that was like kind of my first awareness to it, but it was on multiple facets.
Sure.
So it's very interesting. Question. You are a certified Enneagram coach.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
What does that mean? I love that question. So
It's almost like you knew I was going to ask.
Yeah, well, it's an important question. Yeah. Counseling tends to deal with people's pasts.
Okay.
And processing, what got me to where I am today and what's going on, kind of my inner workings and things like that. Coaching looks to the future. So you think about a physical fitness coach, you think about a life coach, you think about a nutrition coach. You are giving permission to these people to help you set goals, to help you think about the person you want to become.
Yeah.
And so that is what the Enneagram, that's kind of my role. I really try to distinguish that with people that I work with. Like, okay, I'm not your counselor.
Yeah.
Obviously, when you're unpacking someone's personal inner work, some of that's going to come out.
Sure.
But if I can kind of make that distinction, like, what are we aiming towards? How are we wanting to move forward? What's the behavior that you're wanting to, work on? All of that is in the realm of coaching. Counseling is kind of like the next level because you got to work backwards.
Got it. Okay. So with that understanding, if you're just starting with this whole process, what test do you recommend? Because if you Google Enneagram test,
there's a bajillion.
First you have to figure out how to spell it.
Yes,
and then,
that's good.
And then there's all these out there, and
sure.
One of the things that I've dealt with over these personality tests and Enneagram tests, anything like that, is overanalyzing the questions and trying to figure out, how does this impact the actual result? But anyway, so what test do you recommend that you would say these are some that you're going to get some pretty decent results from?
Okay, so I have a love-hate relationship with the tests.
Okay.
Anyway.
Interesting.
The tests are a newer phenomenon because of the popularity.
Okay.
So in kind of if you'll give me a second for the history lesson of the Enneagram, because we said it kind of goes back. It really was that you were kind of expected to work with a person, a mentor, a coach, a whatever label would be given, because it is so nuanced. And for any time that we start trying to ask questions that are very scientific, that is muddy and complicated. Mm-hmm. And what kind of mood are you in that day, and how, but if you work with a person, or even I have found if people read a book like The Road Back to You, or they are at a conference, or they're any time where it's a little bit more human, the results are more accurate. And even the word results is a little bit strange. Here's something that's critical to know. You self-identify. Yeah. So even if you take a quiz or a test or an assessment as a starting point, most people, not everyone, but most people, it's not accurate. But it's a starting point. Yeah. And so they'll get that information and they'll toss out that doesn't sound like me. That doesn't feel like me. I mean, this is a little bit, but I don't know. And that is a part of it. I really have not figured out a way to get around it, because it is you have to be self-reflective. Sure. So, but if if I'm working with a team, I do like to use the Enneagram Institute. Their website. It's a $12 test. Okay. It's probably going to take you about 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. I feel like the questions are great. And it has been the most accurate that I have found. There are there's even apps now that you can put on your phone and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, the silly kind of typical what friends Enneagram type character are you? You know, all of the like kind of pop culture-y stuff. But the Enneagram Institute, it's been around for a couple of decades, and they seem to have kind of really nailed it down. Ian Cron has one, but it's pricey.
Yeah.
And I have not actually done it yet.
Gotcha.
But it's getting great feedback and great reviews. Like if you were the head of an organization and you wanted to pay, especially for yourself.
Sure.
Like I think there's probably value in that, but
it's like $60 or something, isn't it?
It might even be more like $120.
Oh,
like
okay.
It's anyway. Yeah,
Sure.
there's different like categories.
There's
value in having that information.
That's what I was gonna say. As we kind of go through this conversation, I think that there's major value in understanding that. I know. I can tell you specifically, and I know I'm more familiar with Myers-Briggs than I am Enneagram, but my point of it is once I found that information and got access to it, it was a major power shift in just understanding how I deal with people, how people perceive me.
Definitely.
So you can't, at the end of the day, if you are leading a team,
you got to have that information.
$100 is
and making a huge impact on your team. Yeah, definitely. Forbes magazine says that the most valuable feature or skill set of someone in the business world is self-awareness.
Yeah,
like it is more critical than charisma, than the ability to sell something. Like knowing yourself.
Yeah,
that's powerful. I think that speaks to exactly what you're saying.
So after you do the test, or you work with somebody from an assessment standpoint, you disagree with the results.
Yes, I love that.
Like this is definitely not accurate.
That's not me.
Where do you go from there? Yeah.
Sure. So this is great because even my husband had this experience where his initial exposure to the Enneagram, he's like, yeah, a lot of this is kind of ringing true for me. He thought he was a type 4. And then as he and I both were kind of doing more work with the Enneagram and reading and trying to really unpack, he was like, oh, wow, I am definitely a 5. And most people have that kind of like eye-opening, like, wow, I have landed. I know this is where I'm at. And we even would say the phrase like self-identified.
Yeah.
So it is, I think, important, honestly, to like wrestle with that. And if you're kind of figuring, which one am I and where am I at, it's even okay if for a year you've been saying, I'm a 3, I know I'm a 3. And then a year later, you're like, I think I'm a 1. Oh my goodness.
So whoops. Yeah, change it up there a little bit.
It's okay because and it's not, I get questions a lot like, am I bipolar? Which maybe.
Multiple personality disorder.
Yeah. Or like I changed. I know that I was this when I was 16, but I'm different now. I would argue against that. Mm-hmm. When you finally land on like your home base,
sure,
it is like, it's like finding your soulmate. No, it's like there is something that just clicks and you're like, oh, okay. And it doesn't change. Like once you finally are like, oh, I see it now. Like, and this is where I'm at. You won't in 20 years be like, I'm different. So does that make sense?
No, it does.
I mean, it's confusing.
I kind of the same experience is, you take a test or you deal with a coach and you kind of get to a point to figure out what number you are, right? And then once you start doing research on it,
yes,
you go, okay, maybe it's a difference between two different numbers.
Yes.
And it's just through the research that you can go, okay, I can identify with that, or I can see myself in that process.
Yes.
Or not, that does not, I don't identify. Yeah, I don't identify with that at all.
Sure.
It's just kind of understanding the process, but again, figuring out how that applies to. Yeah. I think the more powerful part of it that I've seen is how people perceive you.
Yes.
On the outside.
That's huge, and it speaks again. Enneagram to me uncovers more about motive and the why behind how we are and how we behave, and that is critical. So where certain pieces of a type might not ring true. Well, first of all, let me back up and say this too. You have a little bit of all of the types in you.
Sure.
Because we are not like in a vacuum living lives alone. Like we've been influenced, parenting, childhood, life experiences, trauma, like all of this kind of, builds into who we are and how we act in the world. And we learn how to it's all about adapting and having these kind of modes of operation in the world.
Yeah.
Like it's a protective mechanism, really.
It's interesting that you say that it's about understanding intent. All right, because we recently did a leadership summit for our organization. So
Very cool.
Some of our leadership team came together, and one of the components of that was identifying personality types and discussing it.
Yeah.
And that was one of the topics that we really kind of honed in on or one of the parts of it we honed in on is, okay, as you're dealing with people now, you can understand that they have good intent.
Yes.
The way that they go through it,
Yeah.
the way that they bring it to everybody's attention, the way they communicate it
Yeah.
is the thing that you kind of are understanding, but you understand that we all have the same intent and that we're all working towards a common goal.
Yeah. I think where it shows up very clearly, just as an example for what you're speaking to, you'll hear people say like, I'm not a high energy person, or I don't have any. I think every human being has a ton of energy for whatever they want to have energy for.
Yeah.
Like whatever the thing, whether it is, binge watching Netflix or building a computer from scratch, like we all have energy for the things that we want to have energy for.
Sure. People misinterpret energy for hyperness,
right,
I guess,
exactly.
Right?
So, and that's not accurate.
Yeah,
but,
there was someone I used to tell this all the time, that my old boss's wife's mom.
Okay, there it is. I'm tracking.
Used to say, people do what they want to do.
That's exactly right.
And that's what a lot of it comes down to is people do what they want to do. They'll find the energy, the resources to get it done when they need to.
Yeah, well, and like some people have energy for like planning in their mind.
Yeah.
And so they're big time planners and they can think like 5 years out to like what needs to happen. But that takes energy. It's not a physical energy, but it's energy,
Sure.
So anyway, it is big.
So once you find your results,
yes.
you find your type, you're into that part.
Yes.
What's next? Enneagram memes for Instagram?
All the way.
That's
all day, every day.
This is the value add to life.
Yeah, so I can make fun of other people and make fun of myself.
No,
that's a great question. I think, well, number one, it typically shows you areas that you were very, very aware of about yourself, and almost to the point where you're going like, wait, not everybody's like that. But it also simultaneously shows you things that you were completely blind to about yourself. So it takes a minute to like process that. And so I would say that's the first step is like, okay, now that I have this information, how have I been like really stepping on people's toes and I didn't realize it? Or how have I really not been showing up, like not showing up to life? And maybe I think that's the start of some of the Enneagram work is like, okay, I want to be the healthiest version of myself. And it also will speak to even the Enneagram gives us insight to like how we behave when we're stressed out, when we're overloaded, overwhelmed. That's really critical information in the workplace.
Yeah.
Like if I know that my, coworker, like I can see it like, oh, they're spiraling and they might not even see it yet. But so I think that is also another kind of next step is what do I do? Now I have some information about how to stay healthy, how to handle when I am stressed, and what am I supposed to look like? Because we're all going to have stress. The goal is not, I don't ever want to be stressed out.
Yeah.
That's unrealistic.
Yeah.
In fact, you need stress. Like when you go to the gym, you want to stress your muscles so they grow.
Yep.
So I think that's the next piece. And then, oh man, this is maybe my favorite thing, is just an awareness of how much grace it gives you for other people.
Sure. Yeah.
Just a reminder, you're listening to the Coffee Break Podcast. Also, we wanted to let you know that our team puts together a weekly blog post. You can find it at locdoc.net/blog. It's guaranteed to raise your IQ by 12 points or your money back. So it's pretty much a win-win. All right, back to the conversation.
I want to give you an example. So based off of our leadership summit recently and kind of unpacking a lot of that, I was having a conversation with one of our team members here just within the last couple of weeks.
Okay.
And I realized that I was, I guess coming across very assertive in what I was trying to communicate. And I knew that he was stressed out because I was trying to get him to kind of develop a plan well before he was ready.
Yep.
And so we were in this middle of this just kind of snowball meltdown. And I was like, hold on a second, let's back up here. I was
What's
like,
happening?
I'm not trying to stress you out, and I'm not trying to force you to do something before you're ready, but this is kind of what we're trying to accomplish.
That's great.
And it changed the dynamic of the conversation versus historically, at the end of that, you're just both wanting to strangle each other.
Yes.
Even in the middle of the conversation.
Yes.
It's just an awareness of, okay, let's back up. The result of it, after we kind of went our separate ways to go work on other things, I came back later and he had made progress in the area without
That's huge.
Without that conflict, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's just
a great example.
It's just interesting to know that I think the other side of that would have been if I would have just kind of forced him down and continued to push that assertiveness all the way through.
Yeah.
It would have just caused an undue amount of frustration.
Well, and I know, especially in your organization, you need people to be creative.
Yeah.
You need them to be able to be problem solvers. And a lot of times that pressure crushes all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're trying to draw out positive things that is going to, bring great results.
Yeah.
Like it definitely makes a difference. John Maxwell says, I'd like you a lot more if you were a lot like me. I'd like you more if you were more like me.
I disagree with that statement. That would probably be, those people would annoy me.
Those people. And I think that is, again, with the Enneagram, it kind of breaks some of that down where we start to value people's differences instead of being annoyed by them. Mm-hmm. And I would also say it just has a lot of implications for your marriage, for your, your corporations, things like that. But even between my husband and I for sure can see areas in our marriage where I was frustrated that he was not acting or behaving more like me. Mm-hmm. And he was definitely frustrated that I was not acting or behaving more like him. And now, because again, just an awareness, Enneagram describes it like being asleep. And then once you kind of have some of that information, like you're waking up to yourself, really. But that's kind of a philosophical way to look at it. But it's giving the people around you the support that they need, exactly like you did with your employee, giving them the space that they need to be healthy, and not like forcing them to. Now, it's not an excuse for poor behavior, like by any means.
Just ignore me. I'm just being a whatever.
I'm like, yeah. No. But I do think that it, instead of escalating,
Sure. Yep.
we're able to
Unnecessarily escalating something based off of just not seeing eye to eye. So, okay, you just kind of mentioned it, healthy versus unhealthy versions of each of those, and then you hear wings, and then you hear subtypes.
Yes.
And then I get lost.
It's a lot of jargon.
This is way. So, what's relevant? What's important? And how do you kind of? Let me ask this question, because I just asked you 7 questions all in once.
You're good.
But there's supposed subtypes and wings. What's the difference between subtypes and wings? Maybe is that a better way to ask that?
I'm gonna try and answer all of the questions in my response. So yes, the Enneagram is there can be a lot of new jargon or vocabulary, but it's not as overwhelming as you might think. Truth be told, the best thing ever is just get a book, like read a book. Okay, we know this. Leaders are readers. Read a book, because that will do a lot more to unconfuse you. And I think that's the simplest answer. Now, to be more dead on to what you're asking, start with your type. So your type is your number, okay?
Yep.
And then the next, I think, easiest place is to look at wings. And wings, if you find your home base, so I'm a 7, forever and ever. There's no denying it. So 7 is my home base. And if I look at the behaviors and motivation and qualities of a 7, that in and of itself is a lot of information. But starting as 7 as my home base, I can only be a wing 8 or a wing 6. I'm not a 7 with a 2 wing. Some people, I think, confuse, again, love-hate relationship with the tests. They'll tell me their top 3 results. They'll be like, well, I'm a 7-2-1.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, that's not a thing, but okay, I know what you mean. So you start with your home base, or people will make the assumption that whatever their second highest score is their wing, or things like that. No. You wing to a number on either side of your number. So if you're a 3, you can only be a 3 with a 2 wing or a 3 with a 4 wing.
Got it.
Make sense?
It does.
And what it means to wing, my husband jokingly says, Andrea's a 7 with a 7 wing. So he's like, anyway, but
it's what you are.
This is
right?
what it is. Yeah. But you would know, and again, your wing is a little bit more like you just have to intuit it. Like you have to look at your behavior and
Got it.
see, do I borrow more traits from an 8 or do I borrow more traits from a 6?
Interesting.
Yes. So your next door neighbor, like, right, wherever you are in home base, you look at what their qualities are.
Okay.
And if you see some of that, then it is kind of the idea is like you have learned how to lean into
Yep.
that wing, lean on that side neighbor that you have.
So I think I was going to ask a dumb question, but I may have just answered it in my own mind.
Sure.
Since you said it was a circle,
Yes.
if you're a 1 or a 9, you can have a wing of an 8 or a 1.
That's exactly right. Very good, because it is a circle.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you're a 9,
I was thinking very linear.
no, yeah, that we get that the circle again shows up very powerfully. So yeah, if you're a 9, you can have an 8 wing or a 1 wing. You nailed it. That's very good. Subtypes are I feel like that's like Enneagram 2.0. You know what I mean? Or like if you were in college, like
Yeah.
that would be like the next level. Like this was the 101 class.
Sure.
So subtypes are a whole nother ball game.
Okay.
But there are only 3.
Yep.
And it is the most instinctual behavior that you have. So there is a self-preservation instinct. There is a social instinct, and there is a sexual instinct, or sometimes it's called one-to-one. The simplest way to explain that is if you walked into a party, there's 100 people in this party house. Are you walking into the room like, I wonder where the food is? Like, man, it's really cold in here. Somebody should do something about that. Like, is your awareness a little bit more about your own comfort,
Yep.
needs? Is that where your attention is? That would be a self-preservationist instinct. If you have a social instinct, you're going to walk into that same party and be like, where are my people at? Like you want to find the table that has your 10 best friends.
Yep.
So that's the social instinct. And then the sexual or the one-to-one is you're going to go to that party and you're going to connect with a person. You're going to have a deep conversation. You're going to know everything. You're going to experience chemistry. And like that is kind of what feels like the party was a success.
Gotcha.
So again, there can be a little bit hard to pinpoint. But the important information is a 7, just because I'm speaking about myself, a 7 with a self-preservation subtype
Yep.
looks a little different than a 7 with a social.
Sure.
7 with a, so that is where you actually, and people's minds get a little like, whoa, slow down. So we don't just have 9 types, we've got 9 times 3, that's kind of, the 27, like people get a little bit like overwhelmed.
Yeah, I could definitely feel that. All right. So thank you for explaining that, because that was very unclear. I've heard a lot of that information kind of floating around, but it's like
the other piece is lines and arrows. So that is where you go in growth.
lines and arrows. This is a new one. I haven't heard this one yet.
That's where you go in growth and where you go in unhealth. So sometimes it's called stress or growth.
Okay.
Some people call it lines and arrows. But if you see that Enneagram diagram, the actual Enneagram like symbol for a 7, so we'll talk about a 7, I go to a 1 in unhealth. So that is like my arrow. That's where I go when I'm stressed out. I start acting like the low side of a 1, the negative sides of a 1.
Okay.
When I'm healthy and kind of in a mature place, I go to a 5.
Okay.
So that would be like my growth line.
Interesting. All right. Thank you for
So
explaining
that's
that.
more information, but yeah.
That is very, very beneficial. Okay, so examples of how people are using this in either their personal life, business life, working with a team where they get the major benefit. I know I just kind of gave you a little example earlier, but how are you seeing this as a benefit for people other than just, again, the mocking it on in social? But there is a benefit to having this information.
That's exactly right. The cleanest answer for that is anytime you are in an organization where people are self-aware, that's a good thing, and where people are working towards being or becoming the healthiest versions of themselves, that is beneficial. And then just the piece of giving people grace, understanding that the person who is in your staff meeting who is asking 87 questions and everybody else is ready to move on, and you're like, why are they still asking questions about this? Learning to take a step back and go, we probably need them.
Yeah.
We probably need them asking all those questions, or we're going to really drop the ball on this because we didn't ask those questions.
Sure.
Or the person who you on your staff, maybe you feel like they're super hard to motivate and they just don't have a sense of urgency, and you're like, come on. And all of your 3s and 8s and 7s who are like raring to go on everything all of the time, like stay frustrated
Yeah.
because they're like, we could have done this 2 weeks ago. Why are we not further along? But then the person who maybe is a little bit slower to get motivated, like they're going to be more methodical. They're not going to make as many mistakes. They're going to last longer and not burn out quickly.
Sure.
I mean, so it's again, we could work through every scenario of how teams interact based on the types, but I think the easiest answer is just to say, when I start to see the qualities in people that are innate to them, and knowing the types really helps me to see that super clearly, then I'm able to slow down and go, we need that on the team.
Yeah. And realize that there's value in it.
Yes.
So just because they're different than the way that you see the world doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Obviously, it's bringing a whole nother level of vibrancy to that situation.
And I think a good boss is able to say, and I'll give a very specific example with a type here, but like a 4 who is going to be more creative and artistic, like I don't need to have them at the front desk like answering phones, if at all possible.
Sure.
Now, do we all have to do certain pieces of our job that are difficult? Of course. But if I can cut the 4 loose a little bit and give them some autonomy and say like, here's what we need and here's when we need it by, like go do your thing. That's good.
So I want to ask you this question because I've heard other people say this.
Sure.
Enneagram is more for personal focus, personal endeavors, less of how it applies to a team or business, and Myers-Briggs is more for that. So I've heard that said.
Yeah, sure.
Just by the look on your face, I'm interested to hear your answer on that.
Yeah.
How do you see? Because what is the value add on that?
I probably, obviously, am a little bit biased. I feel like the Enneagram.
It's like asking a Ford dealership what's better about a Chevy.
Tell me, some people say Chevys are better for highway drives and, I feel like Myers-Briggs really does have so much credibility in the business world that we all like to kind of hold on to, what feels good and what systems we're familiar with.
Yeah.
That's great. That's awesome. And there are lots of implications for how that is positive in your organization. Yeah. Great. Keep using it. That's fantastic. I don't think it's an either or. I think it can be both. I think it can be, but for my experience personally, and our team worked with Myers-Briggs, just, similarly to your experience. And it was helpful, but I did not feel like it gave the grace that the Enneagram does. So when we were kind of like working through everyone's Myers-Briggs, it's like, okay, good. So Chad's that and Joe's that and you're that and that. Okay, great.
Yeah. What do we do with it?
Yeah. It did not have the immediate impact of, wow, like I need to get you in your sweet spot and I need to like draw those good things out of you. And here's how you can really maybe it is the little bit more emotional side of me. So like I could see where someone would say maybe it's more personal. I think it's both, and I don't think that it has to be either or.
Well, one of the things that's interesting, the way that you've described it to this point, that I would say has adapted my thought on some of this is the analogy of the round table and not having a specific head of the table, but it being round. And I think in that sense, if you start to think of it in that way, you can make sure that your organization is evenly balanced.
That's exactly right.
So I know there were some other assessments that I cannot remember the name of it, but there were some assessments and it really kind of dove into, well, you need to have a well-balanced organization and you're over here, so you need to have, these other four quadrants or something like that.
Sure.
And I think the round table analogy to me says, well, if you've got a bunch of 7s offloaded and you have very little of the other, then it is an unbalanced team.
Yes. Because
you're all the majority of the organization is going to do things this way.
I would love to be at an organization of all 7s who are like coming in with party hats and like whistleblowers and like, and nothing is getting done.
I was going to say that, but I didn't want to.
Listen, I can totally make fun of the areas of lack. I know what my role is and I know what to, but I have to be reined in. It's okay.
We're having a blast here, but we don't know what in the world we do.
It's so true.
I should have asked this question at the beginning.
Sure.
When you talk to people about this and they go, this has no value whatsoever.
Sure.
What's your response to that? To kind of, again, now that I'm thinking about it, probably should have asked that at the beginning, unless we lost people that said, this is not important.
They're not listening anymore. No, I think that is a great question, wherever it falls into the conversation. I think most of the time I kind of let it be like, all right, I get it. And it is so hard. We have so much access in our culture. I mean, I can go and learn how to baste a turkey, in 5 minutes on a YouTube video, like whatever knowledge I want to acquire, like I really can get a hold of it. And so it's hard to wade through sometimes what is a flyby fad and what is something that is going to have some staying power. And so part of me, we're still kind of early into like the Enneagram, fad, at least this like round of it.
Sure.
And so part of me is just kind of sitting back to like see, what naturally takes and what people, kind of reject. I also feel like there are lots of people who are outside of maybe, so let's say that your first exposure is a podcast that you really love and respect. And you're like, okay, so it piques your interest. But then like someone with an even bigger platform, like now they're talking about, well, that's already kind of adding to the credibility.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm at with it, is people who want to know, like I will talk about it, Enneagram and coffee, let's do it.
Sure.
But, it is not something that is going to have any, I don't have energy to like argue with somebody about it.
Fair enough. All right. So I appreciate your time and effort on this so far. So and you have agreed to stick around for a second episode where we kind of break down some what would you classify it as? We're
going to look at some do's and don'ts specifically in the workplace.
All right.
And I think that again is going to unpack the question that we kind of keep dancing around. Like, what am I supposed to actually do with this?
Okay.
So I think I can kind of put some, some real like hands and feet to what we're talking about, and that will hopefully have some specific applications, and we'll work our way through the numbers a little bit.
All right. So we're going to do that in the next episode, which will be next week. So if you're listening to this right now, then you'll have to stick around for next week. If you're after the fact, then you can go ahead and jump to the next episode. But we'll bring this to a close, and then we'll be back next week with another episode. For those of you who are listening or watching to this for the first time, I want to tell you that we have 2 other seasons available with over 70 episodes of great guests and topics, and lots of information for you to learn from as it relates to business ideas, practices, and strategies. That's been our sole focus for the last couple of months. So I really want to challenge you and encourage you to go check those out. If you haven't already, check out Loc-Doc.net/podcast. You can subscribe there on all of the podcast platforms. And if you're listening to this on iTunes, then just give us a 5-star review, maybe leave some comments. That'll be very beneficial and helpful for us as we continue to try to spread the message and share this information with the business world. So if you'll do that, check that out. We definitely appreciate it. A video version of this podcast, if you're listening to it, is available on Facebook and YouTube. You can check that out. You can check out our brand new studio here for season 3. It's looking sharp, and we're excited for a really great lineup of guests that are going to be coming up. So we'll be back with you. Before we leave,
Yes.
I forgot about this. If they want to find out how to get a hold of you, what's the best way to do that?
The easiest way is AndreaIsaacs.com. That's simple to remember. So AndreaIsaacs.com, lots of good stuff there. That's my blog, but that also has Enneagram information. It's got some pretty fun content. And then Andrea Joy Isaacs on Instagram. Come talk to me on Instagram. I love chatting with people on Insta.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. We'll be back with episode 2 next week.
That'll work.
We'll see you then.